Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming along. Our presentation today is on NZEB. We're very happy to have Gary here from the Irish Green Building Council, who will address you in a few minutes. But just by way of introduction, I'd like to briefly bring you through the evolution of our working group that ended up at this stage. Eamon McGuire and I from the society worked on, in our capacity as chair and vice chair of the commercial committee. We're working on a green leases working group when we came into contact with the Irish Green Building Council and the work that they were doing. It became apparent over the time that this was a new initiative. It was worldwide. It wasn't very well recognised in Ireland. There was something we had to do with it, and it wasn't being acted upon in the society at all. So we attended a couple of seminars that the IGBC were holding, and we praised ourselves of what was happening in the industry. And during that we came across information that related directly to the quality and the design of buildings as we progressed and where we're going. You can see from the slides there that what evolved into what we call the 90% rule is that employees were saying the quality of the working place is very important. That 90% of business leaders worldwide were of the opinion that they should change the workforce in response to the changing stakeholder expectations, and it also reflects on us as property advisors. It was recognised that the business value of incorporating health, well-being and productivity into the corporate offering, and that the benefits that accrue from that. One example there is that 90% of the expenses in running a business, particularly an office building, for example, are related to staff costs, salaries and benefits. So if you save 10% there, you're better off in it results in far better economic savings than say 10% of such of energy costs. So there's just a few interesting research findings that it speaks for itself. Office workers with Windows perform better, they have better night's sleep. Productivity improvements 8 to 11% are common as a result of better air quality. About a view of trees rather than concrete. Also results in increased productivity. So that was then summarised into basically, and this is what we're finding now in the delivery of the modern buildings that are being finished off, office buildings now that are being finished off, is that they have a higher sort of rate of delivery in terms of these under these headings. So how to go green? Well, as we just said there, it's good for health. There is a legislative imperative now which is probably go into greater detail. So it is coming down. We're going to have to deal with it. It's sustainable. It's cost saving. The staff productivity improvements. So I presume in time, we'll be speaking more green language terms, and also for investors there's a better return. So these are the terms that we've used, or that we've become familiar with, which again Pat will bring you up to date with more during his talk. So that's basically it. It is my great pleasure to introduce Pat Berry. He's Chief Executive Officer of the Irish Green Building Council, which he co-founded in 2010. He is an architect with over 20 years of experience in Ireland, Europe and South America. He has a Master's in Environmental Design of Buildings from the University of Cardiff and is a qualified passive in-house DGMB consultant. So it's a great pleasure to be here.
So thank you very much. I think Brian got all the best slides there, because what we're going to be talking about today is going to be a lot drier. It's going to be about NZEB and Part L and the building regulations. Sorry, I didn't have my microphone. Can you all hear me down the back? I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to the Irish Green Building Council. We launched in 2011, and we're a membership organisation, so we're made up of our intent was really to provide metrics for the construction industry to measure sustainability. So we provide independent certification, we provide independent input into government policy around things like we help them develop the national renovation strategy, and we're an established member of the World Green Building Council, which is the World Green Building Council is a network of 7 green building councils around the world. So you'll have heard of the US Green Building Council, UK Green Building Council, Australia. They're all very influential in their own markets, and they each do slightly different things. The UK Green Building Council will be more focused on policy intervention and education. The US Green Building Council is fully focused on its LEED rating system. Similarly, Australia will be very focused on their Green Star rating system. We do a bit of both. We do a bit of all of those things, because in a small country, we only have one organisation that's focused on green building. We've a very broad membership, which takes in everybody from larger developers, the likes of Hammerson, or the building owners like Google, right through all of the professional organisations, the RAI, the Society of Chartered Surveyors. So pretty much everybody in the entire value chain is involved with the Green Building Council. And we're always looking for new members, by the way, to help us do what we do. So we're fully funded by our members, and with that funding we're able to go on then and apply for funding to do other projects like build upon or develop rating systems. So what we're going to talk about today is only a small subset of what we do. NZEB is, the Irish Green Building Council takes a very holistic view of building. Building sustainably is about, it's about health and well-being. It's about, sustainability is more than just energy efficiency. And we've tended to focus a little bit too much on energy efficiency in this country. And we need to broaden that conversation a little bit more, and that's what Brian is talking about there, the impact of buildings on the health and well-being of their occupants. So without more ado, I'm going to get stuck straight into NZEB. Are you all familiar with the term NZEB? It can be a little bit confusing for anybody outside of Europe, because NZEB, say in the States, generally means net zero energy building. But NZEB, as defined in Europe, means nearly zero energy building, which is actually quite a ridiculous term, particularly when you come to implement it in building regulations. It comes from the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. The Energy Performance of Building Directive is that great directive that keeps on giving. It gave us the BERs. It was recast in 2010, and in 2010 it introduced the requirement that all member states should, by end of 2020, all their new buildings should be nearly zero energy buildings. So a nearly zero energy building is a building that has a very high energy performance, the nearly zero or very low amount of energy that still is required to meet for building function, a substantial part, a very significant extent of that energy should be met by renewable sources, including energy from renewable sources produced on site or nearby, and that's very important. So that's the definition of what NZEB is. Key things are very high energy performance and renewable sources produced on site or nearby. Now the rub is that every member state gets to implement that in their own way. And that's where the NZEB comes into play. What does NZEB mean? So each country defines what NZEB is. Say for the European Commission has issued guidelines on what NZEB should mean for the different climatic zones. So Ireland is in the oceanic climate zone, and they have suggested figures that are probably considerably lower than what the Irish government is proposing. But just to give you a little bit of the history of where we're at the moment. Currently, the energy performance of buildings in Ireland is defined by Part L of building regulations. There's two parts. There's two Part Ls. There's Part L for dwellings, and there's Part L for buildings other than dwellings. Now, for dwellings, they were updated twice in 2008 and 2011. The Green Party were in power at the time, and they really drove the agenda on energy efficiency for dwellings. So they got updated twice while they were in office. So for dwellings, energy efficiency was brought to quite a high level by 2011. But of course, we'd stopped building in 2008, so we didn't really see the impact of those changes until now. So currently, we're operating under 2011. Sorry, I've jumped down to this one. Under Part L 2011, which is quite a good standard. It's not a bad standard. Compared with the rest of Europe, we're way ahead of, say, Northern Ireland. Even we're further ahead of the UK. So we're not bad. So to get to NZEB for dwellings, it's not a huge leap. For non-residential, it's a completely different story. Building regulations were updated in 2008, but they weren't really updated. All that they introduced in 2008 was the maximum performance of energy. I'll get onto that. It introduced this coefficient so that they could introduce BERs for non-residential buildings, but it didn't really change fundamentally the energy efficiency of the non-residential buildings. So they're quite far behind. They haven't been updated in 10 years. The government did intend to update them in 2 steps to get to NZEB in 2014, but for whatever reason, there wasn't a lot going on at the time, and I think the staff cuts within the Department of Housing, the Department of Environment at the time, they did actually bring out a draft, but it never actually got executed, because the intent was to improve the energy performance of offices by 40% in 2014, 2015, and then by 60% as the final definition of NZEB. But that never happened. So what they skipped that step and said, forget it, we'll just go straight to NZEB. And that's why the building regulations, or NZEB, is now being defined by these 2 Part Ls. Part L for conservation of fuel and energy buildings other than dwellings, which was put out to consultation in 2017, and that has now come into the SI, the statutory implement to introduce that was signed in January of 2018, so earlier this year. So that's fully defined. The residential, there was less urgency to update the residential because we've gotten to a reasonable standard. Which, just going back to, I suppose, The Part L was so far behind that for non-residential, that really needed to be updated quickly. For dwellings, it was brought out to consultation in May. The consultation is further consultation meeting next Friday that I'm attending, where they're going through all of the comments on the draft. And that will probably be signed off as the final document maybe later in the autumn. Now I'm just going to go through, so you can read, the full documents are online on the Department of Housing website, so you can download those and read them rather than coming ask. That's the source material you should go to see exactly what NZEB as implemented through Part L means. Now, the dates are really important because this is a very important slide if you're not aware of the dates. So on the top line I've got buildings other than dwellings, and below we have dwellings. Now there's a difference with the implementation of Part L and NZEB, which makes it quite different to any other building regulations, in that the dates, the cut-off date is 1st of January 2020. And that 1st of January 2020 means that those buildings have to be NZEB. It's not that the government has to introduce the requirements for NZEB. No, those buildings already need to be, those new buildings already need to be NZEB. So that's why it's careful to watch these dates. So on the 1st of January 2019, that's 4 or 5 months away, the building regulations for non-residential, the new building regulations that implement NZEB for non-dwellings come into force. Now there's a get-out clause. If you already have planning permission, you can still build to 2008. And you also have you have a certain amount of time to get that built. You've got 1 year to get the building built under 2008 regulations. For Part L, for dwellings, that comes into force on the 1st of April 2019. That's what's in the draft. So if you've already got planning permission, you could still potentially build to 2011 building regulations. And here's the rub. This is the one to watch out for. The 1st of January 2020. By that date, if you still want to operate to 2008 regulations, you need to have the structure up by the 1st of January 2020. So that's only 15, 16 months away. So you have to, otherwise you have to go back and implement NZEB, the new Part L 2017. And the 1st of April 2020 is the cut-off date. You're getting a year. If you've got planning permission to go to, if you've got planning permission prior to the 1st of April 2019, you've got 1 year to get the structure up. Or substantial completion. Substantial work should be completed by those dates. Is that clear? And then 1st of January 2021 is the final cut-off date. Any new building should be achieving NZEB by that date. So I suppose, well, just be wary of those dates. I'd say there'll be a lot of builders pouring concrete over Christmas 2019, I'd say will be Christmas. There'll be no Christmas for the construction industry. They'll be all pouring concrete. What does substantial completion mean? Sorry, substantial work. Substantial work is defined in the building regulations. It's a little bit vague. Substantial work has been completed means that the structure of the external walls has been erected. Now, I think that means up to wall plate level at whatever the highest level of the building is. So that's quite a key thing. Any questions? Or Or do you want to keep the questions till the end? So what are the main changes? Now I'm dealing, it's a lot to take in if you're not familiar with the changes. I'm dealing with both non-residential and with dwellings. So for non-residential, it's not really hugely ambitious. When we heard the term nearly zero back in 2010, that sounded very exciting. But after it's gone through several iterations and cost optimality studies, what the actual implementation of it is not that far ahead of what good practice already is. So it's equivalent to a 50 to 60% improvement over the current building regulations. Now that varies slightly because you've a lot of non-residential, could be anything. It could be a school, hospital, office building. For an office building, I think it's around about 60%. For hospital buildings, it's probably a good bit less. And remember, it also defines subgroups within office buildings. We have air-conditioned buildings are treated slightly differently to naturally ventilated buildings. So air-conditioned buildings and hotels, air-conditioned hotels versus naturally ventilated hotels are allowed particularly air-conditioned buildings are allowed a slightly higher energy usage than naturally ventilated buildings, which doesn't really make sense. But within the building, you have to achieve a percentage improvement over the current building regulations, and that's what compliance is about. But there's also backstops. So, for example, there will be improved U values. So the U values for non-residential are brought in line with the current regulations for dwellings. So they go from 0.27 for walls, for example, down to 0.21, and for windows down to 1.6. Thermal bridging will become more important. I mean, what non-residential has gotten away with up until now is unbelievable compared to dwellings. There's no air tightness test required for office buildings, just incredible. A lot of you probably do them anyway, but it wasn't really required. Thermal bridging wasn't really considered. It introduces a requirement for a limitation on solar gain, and it introduces an air tightness requirement of 5 cubic meters per hour per square meter. Now again, at 50 pascals. Again, that's not hugely ambitious. I'd say most schools would have been achieving under 3, and it can be a little bit more complex for buildings like hospitals, big complex buildings to do air tightness tests. But 5 isn't terribly ambitious. It's not hugely difficult. So there's nothing in here that really frightens the horses. The only thing that was really concerning at the consultation, the main thing that was causing concern appeared to be the renewable energy ratio. Now, the renewable energy ratio is the part that complies with the European Commission's requirement for a significant part of the energy to be met with renewables. So initially they set it at 20% of the final demand, of the final regulated demand. So when we're talking about building regulations regulate all of the fixed energy within the building, things like lighting, heating, pumps and fans. But it doesn't regulate, the equipment. If you have all the computers or the servers or the data centers, it doesn't. They're more process loads, so they're not counted within the building regulations. So it's only talking about the fixed energy loads or regulated energy loads. So there was quite a lot. 20% didn't appear massively ambitious. It didn't appear to us like a significant amount of the energy demand. But even at 20%, there was a lot of pushback. So as a result of that, and there's certain advantages to it, they said, well, what if you make your building even more efficient? Could we not count that as renewables? And that's what they agreed to do. So generally under the building regulations, under NZEB, you're required to be 60% better than 60% better than current building regulations, and then you have to meet 20% of that with renewables. But if you go to say 70% better, then you only have to provide 10% of the final demand through renewables. And I suppose the key concern was for large inner city developments in tight urban developments. How do you get all of that, say PV on the roof, or how do you, it might be a 20-story building, how could you meet that 20%? So you can meet it by getting 10% better again, and then you only have to meet 10% improvement. For dwellings, as I said, dwellings don't have as far to go. They really only have to improve by 10%. Now that would be a bit of a stretch goal for a lot of people who are struggling to meet the current building regulations. And going 10% better again, you're into, the low-hanging fruit is now gone, so you're trying to get that additional 10%. It's actually quite tough. So while it doesn't seem like a lot, that extra 10% does make it quite tough. So now I've introduced this crazy term, maximum permitted energy performance coefficient. That's just a very complicated way of saying that. So the maximum performance energy coefficient is 0.3. That just means that the building has to perform 70% better than the baseline. I'm going to explain all of this in the next slide. So the baseline was 2006 for dwellings Part L. So it has to be 70% better. The renewables energy ratio, they've introduced the renewable energy ratio now into dwellings under the current building regulations. On the current building regulations, it's a flat figure you have to meet. You have to meet 10 kilowatt hours per square meter, which doesn't really make sense, because if you make your building really efficient, and you might not have a need for that renewables. So what they've done is introduced a renewable energy ratio for dwellings as well, and it's a far more sensible way of doing it. That means if you make your house hyper efficient, you don't have to spend much on your renewables, because you get your demand down to a very small amount. Your renewables can be quite small as well, and that's the cost efficient way of meeting the requirement. The air tightness has gone down from 7 down to 5, but the rub is you have to do it on every dwelling now. It's not just 1 in 4 or a sample under for the current building regulations. Now, from our experience, most house builders already test every house. Well, any of the houses that we are certifying under Home Performance Index, the developers test every house. They're probably just the better end of the developers. It introduces requirements around overheating, because this is the big issue that's going to really crop up. We're already getting evidence of overheating under the current building regulations, and that'll get worse as air tightness requirements improve, and insulation. We will have problems with overheating. So now they're requiring overheating assessment. There's more, and an interesting one around water efficiency. Water efficient for apartments, the biggest user of energy is likely to be the heating the water for showers and sanitary ware. And there was no requirement before for water efficiency of those taps and showers. Now they're not introducing a regulation there, but you will get credit within the software if you have flow restrictors on your taps. The flow restrictors have potential, if you put a water efficient shower in, if you take the worst shower on the market, it can deliver 26 or up to 46 litres per minute. If you take the most efficient shower on the market, it delivers 3 litres per minute. So there's a gap of 10, a factor of 10. That means your hot water tank is emptying at rate 10 times faster with the least efficient shower, and all that water has to be heated. So it can have quite a significant impact on your energy efficiency. So we have that. We have a requirement in the Home Performance Index for efficiency, for minimum efficiency for water because of that, and because we want to save water as well. But a lot of housing developers they're still not getting that bit of it. Water efficiency is really important for energy and for water. Now, with dwellings, they're also introducing a new Part F, because Part F is the regulations for ventilation. Now, because they're improving the levels of air tightness, they have to be very careful about making sure that there's adequate ventilation. So, because the air tightness is going from 7 down to 5, you're still allowed to use background ventilation, but if this is the rub, if your air permeability is 5 meter cubed or greater than 3 meter cubed, you can still use hole in the wall type vents, or you can still use hole in the wall overrun fans, but you have to increase the area of them, which is complete nonsense really, because you've got this more airtight building and then you have to make bigger holes. So it's equivalent, I think, of 2 holes in each bedroom, 2 100mm diameter holes in each bedroom. And it also means that the less, the developers are really trying to cut costs and don't want to install a ventilation system, because once you go below 3, you have to install some form of permissioned ventilation system. So what happens if you come in at 2 point, well, if the developer hadn't intended installing ventilation and he comes in with an air tightness of 2.5? Well, the evidence in the UK is that they just get they get somebody with a Stanley knife standing there slashing the air tightness membrane until the reading falls down to 3.1. That's complete nonsense. So we end up with 2 levels of quality. So we have been quite forceful in our consultation on this. There can only be one level, only one way of doing it. I mean, otherwise this is going to introduce 2 levels of quality within the whole construction industry. So that's just a summary of the new values for dwellings. Now, it also introduces requirements for major renovation. Where 25% of the surface area of the building envelope undergoes renovation, then the energy performance of the whole building should be improved to the cost optimal level of, insofar as it is technically, functionally, and economically feasible. Now, there's quite a lot of get-outs within that statement, and quite often, another thing to say, a lot of the new building regulations are largely based, improvement in the building regulations were largely based on a cost optimality study. What cost optimality means that over the lifetime, that the money invested in the energy saving should pay for itself over the lifetime of the building. That's what cost optimality essentially means. And that's really how they came up with the 60%, and they came up with different 60% improvement for NZEB. Now, NZEB is a completely different thing from cost optimality, so you could claim that they shouldn't really be using that approach. And for dwellings, it's 25% of the whole surface area, and generally or it's 125 kilowatt hours, so it equates to a B2, B3 or B2, when calculated in deep. So you're carrying out 25, if you were renovating, say, your house, and you do work to more than, say, 25% of the whole envelope, say the entire back wall and say the front and back wall, you're putting on external insulation, or say you're doing a massive extension, wraparound extension, where you wrap an extension around two walls of, let's say, in a semi-detached house, and you wrap an extension around the front and side of it, you probably hit 25%. But then you would have to bring the whole house up to a cost optimal level of energy efficiency. Now, it sounds more onerous than it probably actually is, because they've given a list of things you should do, like changing the boiler, improving the attic insulation. So you probably get away with just doing a couple of relatively minor measures. But it does mean that you have to be aware for extensions. You can quite quickly get up to a 25% renovation of the area of the house, and then your client needs to be aware. Then they need to do other work to the rest of the house to improve to the cost optimal level of energy efficiency. Now, this is all set out in Part L, so I won't go through it in immense detail. It also allows, because we must be aware that we can't necessarily bring every house, we can't treat all houses in the same way when we're renovating. Some of them are older structures, they have solid brick facades, and we have to be careful that we don't carry out insulation measures to those walls that could lead to damp problems or condensation problems. So there is allowance, where it's an older or historic or traditionally built structure, that we should be, looking at appropriate means of insulating those. Now, I'm just going to, how do we get cost-effective NZEB strategy? There's 3 steps to this. First of all, you need your architect from the very first point he puts pen to paper to be aware of what he's doing. The very first sketches are the things that are going to have the biggest impact on reducing energy efficiency, or improving energy efficiency. It's the form, the shape, controlling solar gain. Well, it's controlling solar gain for non-residential, and maybe allowing for solar gain for some dwelling, controlled solar gain for dwellings as well. Whether it can be mixed mode or natural ventilation, that's a big decision that's going to have a big impact. And levels of natural daylight, lighting is quite a significant percentage of your overall energy costs, particularly in office buildings. So once you've got, that's the biggest step, that will reduce your energy demand very significantly. It'll have a huge impact. Next thing, whatever services you do put in have to be the most energy efficient services that you can put in. LED lighting, heat recovery, or very efficient variable speed pumps for HVAC. Just stuff, the most energy efficient stuff that you can put in. And then if you do steps 1 and 2, then number 3 should be quite relatively easy, because you've cut your energy demand by these first 2 steps, and therefore step 3 isn't so tough. Now, there was a bit of lobbying at the time, I understand, whether the foreign direct investment were able to move, there's a certain type of client that has a standard specification that they want to use in Texas, and they want to use it in Dublin, and there's a concern about how, with a highly air-conditioned office, you can meet the 20% or. But at least this is beginning to focus their minds. If you want to go for that type of building, you are going to end up with a lot more renewables than if you go for a more engineered, mixed mode type of office building. But the key thing, architect needs to be aware of what he's doing, that he can't just plaster the entire building in glass and then expect the building services engineer to work it out afterwards. I'm just going to, this is a really boring slide, we'll have to get through it. So how is compliance demonstrated? Well, dwellings use DEEP, it's the compliance software, which is the Dwelling Energy Assessment Procedure. That's what's used to create the BER. And effectively what it does is non-residential buildings use NEEP, the Non-Residential Energy Assessment Procedure. It's usually applied in Ireland through a program called SCSI, which is a very crude Excel sheet. Well, it's not an Excel sheet, but it's basically based on Excel. It's called Simplified Building Energy Modeling. Now, this is where we come to the maximum permitted energy performance coefficient. So both dwellings and non-residential have to meet the maximum permitted energy performance coefficient and the maximum permitted carbon performance coefficient. Now that sounds very complicated, but all it means is it's a coefficient for dwellings under NZEB of 0.3, which means it has to be 0.3 of what the energy use under Part L 2006 was. So in 2006, it measured against the 2006 regulations. So that's the type of home we built under the boom. So dwellings under NZEB should use 0.3 of the energy that those homes as measured within this software. So essentially what you're doing is you're putting in all of the specification into your deep software, the area of wall, the area of windows, the orientation, the U values, the air tightness, all of that stuff. You're putting that into your software, and the software does two calculations. It calculates how much energy that building would have used in 2006 and how much with your NZEB specification that you put in, with your enhanced specification that you put in for the new dwelling, and it works out, are you 70% better? And have you met all of the backstop? So have you met all of the U values? So you put the U values for the windows in, you put the U values for the walls, all of that, it ticks all of those, they're fine. But if it doesn't meet the 70% better than that same building measured in 2006, it's a fail, it's a cross, which means non-compliance. That's what it looks like in the software. Again, for non-domestic energy assessment procedure, it's something similar. Now, for the non-domestic energy assessment procedure, they've had a lot of fun working this out because the NHS came back and said, well, we can't meet 20% of renewables because we have operating theatres that use a massive amount of energy. So there's a lot of toing and froing and working out, well, is that energy you use in the operating theatre, is that a fixed load or is it a process load? You know, something inherent with the process that happens within hospitals. So you have a huge number of air changes in an operating theatre that you wouldn't have, say, in a normal building. So they agreed, okay, that's the process, it's not part of the fixed loads. So they had to work out all of these different process, and for data centres similarly. So they had to work out different different approaches for process loads for the different type buildings. So they haven't updated this fully. It should be out this month, the new version of NEEP. So we probably won't know exactly what you need to meet until the end of the month when we have the revised version of NEEP and SBAM. And I suppose just so you understand it a bit better, like both of these buildings theoretically could meet NZEB, but which would use more energy? So if you take, like, theoretically, and if you're any quantity surveyors here, you would say, well, I would shoot the architect who did something like this, and you'd be quite right, because you could meet NZEB with that, you could meet NZEB with that, but not only would this take a huge and more, because this has such a surface area, it's got a much higher level of heat loss. So if you've got an apartment in a building like this, say it's only a single access apartment, you can only lose heat through that area of wall. But this apartment is losing wall heat through the roof, to the sides, to the floor. And no matter how you insulate it, there's a certain amount of heat transfer through the insulation. You're going to have to put far more insulation on this building than you're going to have to put on this building to achieve the same result. Not to mention, if you're required to calculate the thermal bridging, well, for this building you've only got 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, you've a limited number of thermal bridging. So your thermal bridge assessor is going to become rich, but he's not going to become that rich. Whereas your thermal bridge assessor here, they just give up. And that's why it comes back to cost, achieving NZ cost effectively. You have to think about from the very beginning, this is going to need less insulation to achieve the same end result as something like this. It's going to require less working out of junctions. It's going to require just an awful lot less work. Doesn't mean we have to go to boring architecture. It just means that we have to, to develop a new design aesthetic. So this is I took this from I was just googling images of representative of a building with a highly articulated surface and one without. And one former resident said he fled after developing asthma and finding his cat dead. So I think that's something like that. A very interesting building, mind you. It was from a time in the 1960s, and they were all very idealistic, but didn't really understand building physics in the same way. So the key point in a strategy towards NZ is just compact form, particularly for dwellings, reduce your heat loss area to a minimum. And then for minimizing solar gain is a key one. Solar shading, avoid as much solar shading. How much time have we got, by the way? I must be over. I shall try and finish up quickly there.
You're okay for about 10 minutes.
All right.
5 minutes.
So, the central bank is a very good example. The way it achieved solar control, the architect made a virtue of the fact that they had to introduce solar control, so went mad with all of this kind of mesh, and it changes as you go around the facade, so there's less on the side facade, and there's on the back, there's no stone, so on the north side, there's very little. So you use that to generate a whole design aesthetic. So again, that's a big impact on getting to an NZ building, particularly for offices. And then, we were building, this is from, it's either East Point, no, it's actually the Aircon building, and Scott and Walker did this back in 1997. But they got all the basics right. You look at all Scott and Tom Walker buildings from the 1990s. They have their solar shading. They have their coffered slabs, and this was all about using thermal mass to cool the building. They had night cooling, so the night cooling would come across yonder. You'd open the windows at night. The air would flow across the slab to maximise the surface area there, so the surface of the concrete will absorb all of the excess heat during the day, and then at night you open the windows, high-level windows, the air flows across it, cools it down, and it's ready to absorb all of that excess heat the following day. Interesting thing, they did a lot of these buildings out in East Point, and it's interesting to see, go back now, 20 years later, and see ones have been retrofitted as LEED buildings. And they're fully air conditioned, and they're probably using a lot more energy than they did then. But part of this is because American multinationals want their air conditioning, and the whole idea of having natural ventilation is they don't understand. Now, other things you need to be aware of. For a commercial building, slightly more complex with your air tightness and your thermal inflow. It's trying to define that with your architect. Where is it? Like for a commercial building with basements, you really need to draw your line of where your thermal envelope is. It's not that outer line of where your basement is. You need to work out where are the heated spaces, and where are your thermal bridges going to occur. So typically on this, you could have thermal bridges, at these different junctions in the basement, and you're trying to draw your line. So you have to look at all of these junctions to make sure that you're not. Are you familiar with thermal bridging, the whole concept? With thermal bridging, heat flows quicker through steel and through concrete than it does through insulation. That's why we insulate. So we're all the time trying to work out, well, how do we stop that thermal bridge? Because that's outside the heated envelope, that's inside. So how do we avoid heat transfer? And particularly for commercial buildings, there's a lot of, and because thermal bridging, we understand it pretty well in dwellings, but if you're involved in just commercial buildings, you haven't had to deal with it. And a lot of commercial buildings are built of steel, which makes it even more complex because steel transfers heat incredibly quickly. So you put a lump of steel through your facade, it's like it's like a burst balloon. That heat is going to flow very quickly through the steel to the outside. And it's not so much the heat loss; it's the condensation that occurs because the steel on the inside is going to get cold, it's going to get moist, it's going to attract moisture, and you're going to get mold. So the engineers should be aware that there's ways of avoiding thermal bridging within steel structures using special connectors. Where the steel comes down onto the basement slab, how can you minimize thermal bridging there? Now, one of the things, sometimes I'm not making an advertisement for thermal bridge assessors or anything, but it is worth investing in having a thermal bridge assessor on the design team because I was running by one contractor who was saying, he's looking at different systems for building a nursing home or something, and he wanted to use a particular manufacturer's thermal bridge, verified thermal bridge details. But he wanted to use a mix, which meant he couldn't. And I was explaining to him, you'd probably save a lot more costs by spending a couple of thousand working out the key thermal bridges than trying to, because if you don't deal with your thermal bridges, you have to use a default in the software, which means that you have to put more insulation on the entire building, or you have to do something else, which could end up costing tens of thousands rather than spending it on. If you calculate your thermal bridges, you can use the actual calculated, it's called the, sorry, I'm getting a bit technical here, it's called the Y factor within deep. But that's why it's sometimes worth spending a few bob on a thermal bridge assessor because it can save you a lot on optimizing your insulation elsewhere. Again, there's details for balconies, for avoiding thermal bridges. There's more and more components available to avoid thermal bridges. For dwellings, you have thermally broken foundations. There's lots of systems for insulating the foundations. Now, just a note on, I mentioned NZEB, we're all talking about NZEB, and you may be using LEED or BREEAM or WELL or whatever, but WELL isn't really a sustainability tool. But even if you're achieving a LEED Platinum or a BREEAM Excellent, it's no guarantee that you're achieving an NZEB building that you comply, because remember, LEED is a global standard, so it's not measuring against Irish building regulations, it's measuring against global standards. So you need to be careful that you're also, if you're going for a LEED building, you're also tackling NZEB. And BREEAM is based on percentage improvement over your existing regulations. But our regulations, NZEB regulations, haven't come into force yet, so you could have an BREEAM Excellent building this year or next year, but still isn't NZEB. The only, if you're doing dwellings, we insist on, if you're going for goals, you must be NZEB for dwelling to get our certification. It's a Home Performance Index. Just trying to brand that into your brains there. With the glowing Home Performance Index. For more information, you need to read Part L for dwellings, Part L for non-residential. But as I said, I don't think NZEB is hugely ambitious, particularly for non-residential. It's good practice at the moment. It's not best practice. It's not really that challenging. I suppose the central bank, it's not actually an NZEB building because they didn't meet the renewables requirement. But the energy efficiency requirement, if you're building state-funded projects, or better quality developers were probably meeting the energy efficiency requirement, but they weren't meeting the REO. But if you look at what's happening in other countries, where are we going next? This, for example, is building a student accommodation building in Paris. That literally is zero energy building. All of those thermal, these are solar thermal panels that heat this massive big tank that stores the heat for a year. And they use that heat in the winter for both heating and for heating and hot water. And they have full array on the roof for electricity. This is a new movement in Norway that's really taken off. It's called Powerhouse, and they are moving to genuinely net zero. These are buildings that meet all of their energy needs, and it seems to be taken off in Norway. So we're still a long way to those. And I don't know if you heard of the Bullet Center in Seattle. Again, this building meets the Living Building Challenge, which means that at the end of the year, they look at the bills and there must be a zero. It must officially have met all of its energy needs. And this is the ultimate example. It's they reduced the energy requirement within the building as far as they possibly could, and then they had to put a massive big solar array on top to meet the rest of the needs. Now, I'm not saying that this is necessarily the way we should go, but in terms of the gap between NZEB and this, it's quite substantial. We're not talking about those levels of ambition with NZEB. We're also working with the World Green Building Council on a certification at the COP 2015 in Paris. The World Green Building Council committed to introduce a net zero carbon certification, and that is now being introduced in different countries, and several cities have signed up to meeting that requirement in their country by 2030. Now it's a bit like NZEB. Instead of, they probably possibly made the mistake of allowing each Green Building Council to set their own version of that, or the NZEB. But we're trying to work now with all the European Green Building Councils to have one European definition. And And the crux is, how far can we chase down energy efficiency in buildings? Because we really need to be looking at the total life cycle assessment of the building. How much carbon and energy does it take to build the buildings in the first place? And in some cases, up to 50% of that carbon could have been emitted before we even occupy the building, in the materials that go into the building, the transport. It's mainly the materials that go into the building. Concrete has huge carbon footprint, but also the transport. So we are trying to raise awareness now of assessing the full footprint of the building throughout its entire life cycle. Take for an NZEB home, it could well be an apartment building, 50% of the energy consumption, 50% of the total carbon is likely to happen under one study by Sturgis before it's even occupied. Which means that there's no point in chasing down energy efficiency much further without dealing with the impacts of building the building. And that's why we are doing a lot more work on this ourselves. We've set up an environmental product declaration program to try and get the data on products, so that architects and engineers can then calculate the actual footprint of the building. And that's the advancing net zero. The approach we will probably take for net zero carbon buildings will include the embodied carbon. So that's where it's beginning to go. Over the next few years, you'll see regulation on the embodied carbon. Holland already has that. Finland are introducing it by 2025, and a lot of other countries are likely to follow. And I would imagine the European Commission will start regulating this within the next 5 years. And so that's why we start to move to different types of constructions. This is the construction of the 22-story student housing block in Vancouver. It's built entirely from cross-laminated timber. The columns, everything is built out of timber. And we really need to start looking at, total circular economy. How do we meet all of our energy needs? How do we deal with the materials? How do we make sure that all of those materials within the buildings can be reused in the future? So that's where we're going over the next 5-10 years after NZEB. But just a final slide. I have given you a certain amount of introduction to NZEB, but we have a series of 8 webinars, free webinars that you can sign up to, lunchtime webinars on our website that you can sign up to in October and November. 4 of them are on dwellings and 4 of them are on non-residential. So they're free, you can just sign up to them. And that's it really. And we have a range of speakers. We have speakers on the different aspects. We have Sean Armstrong from Apartment Housing. We have a speaker on energy efficient services on each aspect of designing an NZEB building. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Pat, for a very, very interesting talk. Now we have a few minutes for questions, and if you're looking for a new direction, you can always go for the term of bridging assessor job. Yes, Martin.
Pat, I have 2 questions.
Yep.
After achieving compliance with NZEB, will there be an ongoing requirement for an annual or biannual certification? A bit like the NCT, let's say.
No, I mean, it's just like building regulations, and that's the problem with building regulations. There's no requirement at the moment.
I suppose in 2020 a building might comply with 28, 29, boilers wear down, climates change, etc. So it's once you comply, you comply.
Well, it's the same. It's the same as all previous building regulations. There isn't currently a requirement to go. Now, building control theoretically, yes, should be able to go back to them and say, "Do you still comply?" But do they? I don't think they do.
That's kind of related to the second part of the question, where how for office buildings particularly, let's say, how do the standards to achieve it rate against LEED, from a marketing valuation perspective, let's say, would it, particularly for US investors and occupiers, would they still look to LEED regardless of having NZ compliance for a building?
Well, I suppose the thing is, LEED is about so much more than the energy efficiency. LEED uses the ASHRAE methodology for building a model, which is possibly a lot more accurate than the SBEM, which is very simple, because the ASHRAE model requires building a dynamic model as opposed to SBEM, which is essentially a very simple Excel. So we would say that the ASHRAE model is far more accurate than SBEM. But it's likely that you will be able to show compliance through a dynamic simulation as well, to NZEB, because it's far more accurate than using a very simplistic approach of SBEM, simplified building energy model.
Thanks.
But I think they will still look for LEED because they're looking for a global benchmark. But LEED will have to bring up the standard. They're currently looking at European regionalisation, so they'll take account of the fact that all buildings in Europe now have to meet the NZEB standard, and they will relate the credits to that.
And then,
Will the NZEB make build costs more expensive?
Well, there is a regulatory impact document you can download, which would have been issued at the time of the first consultation, and that sets out what the estimated uplift costs were. Now, I was giving this presentation to a contractor there recently. There's a couple of quantity surveyors, and they had quite a lot of experience. They were saying it could be up to 15%, but then it all depends on what stage you're applying NZEB. So if the building wasn't really designed, it's a bit like a LEED or BREEAM building. If you come in at the end of the project and try and get it up to a LEED or a BREEAM standard, then it's going to cost you a lot more. Whereas if the building was designed from the very beginning to meet an NZEB, then it should be a lot more cost effective to meet it. So I'm always wary of saying that, a standard will cost so much more, because it really depends on how they went about doing it. That's why I mentioned that whole inverse triangle. If you work through those steps, it becomes a lot cheaper to meet the NZEB standard.
yeah, and I mean, the general thinking is that if you design it from the beginning, it shouldn't cost that much more, but the benefits are greater. You should attract a higher, level of tenant, more rent and cheaper overheads. So the thinking is it's obviously long-term is a better plan. It's a good plan.
What are the consequences if you don't comply with the regulation when the tests are undertaken? Can the building not be occupied, or is there a penalty, or?
Well, it's the same. It's BCAR. There's nothing different. All that's happening now is that the regulations have been updated. BCAR applies, so it's the same level of onerous compliance applies then as for now. It's just that the regulations changed. It's just NZEB. I suppose NZEB is just the term, but it's really Part L now that we're talking about.
Okay.
Sorry, just on that. So NZEB is approved through BCAR, so that's right how it's working.
Yeah, I mean, see, NZEB doesn't really. NZEB is a term introduced by the European Union, but after 2020, it's just Part L. So it's not really a term. You could use it for marketing terms to say I'm Part L. I am an NZEB building because I've applied for the new Part L. So you could use it for marketing, but it's just building regulations after 2020.
So that brings us to 2 o'clock. If there's one last question, we might take it. If not, we'll just wrap up, and thank you all again for coming along. Very interesting conference. Thank you again, Pat. That was very interesting. So now I know what the whole thing is about.